The Dark Souls series, in a span of a few years, has become a completely legendary series, and From Software has turned into a top development studio. Since this awesome and mysterious game series has become even bigger with more fans than ever, we thought it was finally the right time to talk about 10 Dark Souls facts you probably didn't know. Starting off with number 10, some of you guys are probably going to get a kick out of this one. Early players who got their hands on the game a few days before the Japanese launch of the original Dark Souls were completely crushed and brutalized by From Software themselves. Using the invasion system, From Software sent level 145 Black Phantoms into these early players' games. These guys have their abilities completely maxed out and are at roughly 2000 HP. So it's quite obvious that early players got their asses handed to them. That's pretty classic. It makes sense that From Software would do that. And at number 9, here's something you might have missed. Demon Souls, the original Dark Souls, and Bloodborne all share identical leveling costs. That means to level your character up in a game, the price remains the same, even when it rises consistently through each game title. So as much as each Souls game is different, they do adhere to some sort of formula and ideology, and this is probably the best example of that. And at number 8, did you know that the composer of the early Tales of games, such as Tales of Vesperia, also composed the soundtrack to Dark Souls? His name is Motoi Sakuraba, and he's been composing game scores for years. And it's safe to say that we should tip our hats off to him because the Dark Souls score is always amazing. It's just interesting for comparison's sake. Go back and listen to some of the old Tales of Vesperia battle themes and compare it with some Dark Souls music. They're all really great, but it seems like he really stepped it up for Dark Souls. And for good reason. The games sound absolutely freaking beautiful. And at number 7, here's something very odd that we came across. The quiet resolve gesture in Dark Souls 3 is from the Dark Souls 1 trailer. Look closely. Do you see that? That's it. Very weird, and I don't think there's much of another explanation except that they pulled that directly from that trailer. What's even crazier is that Henri, the character who you get the gesture from near the Yorshka bonfire in Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, is wearing the Elite Knight armor from the original Dark Souls game and from the trailer. Isn't that weird? That's all a really weird convenience, am I right? Also, God, do I miss the look of the Elite Knight armor in that game. And at number 6, we gotta give a shout out to the actual death metal band that exists called Soul Mass. This Florida-based metal band's lyrics are based around Dark Souls lore, most notably their album Age of Darkness. The name of the band is definitely a nod to the spell homing Soul Mass in the games, but I just think it's very commendable that they dedicated themselves and their music to the Dark Souls lore with a bunch of stuff like a song titled Hollow, lyrics about the Abyss Walker, dying, hell, stuff like that. And if you're into this type of metal with growling vocals, it's actually pretty good. And at number 5, there's a horror film titled Dark Souls that actually released in 2011, the same year as Dark Souls the game. This indie Norwegian horror film is a horror mystery type movie involving mysterious victims having zombie-like symptoms with people's brains getting drilled in, vomiting black gross stuff, and a father of a victim kind of going down and getting to the bottom of things. Sounds a little generic, but it's got a cool poster and it looks decent. It won some awards at some European film festivals, despite receiving some mixed reviews. What are the chances, though, that a movie and a game of the same title released in the same year? I chalk that up as one big fat oops, and I think the oops definitely goes more towards the side of the movie. And at number 4, did you know that there's a Dark Souls themed cafe in Tokyo? This was established as kind of a promotional thing before the launch of Dark Souls 2 in coordination with From Software and an Australian cafe company. It's got a very cool look to it. There's sets of armor, treasure chests, a bonfire, a bunch of themed stuff, a themed menu, dioramas, costumes, and the drinks come in bottles shaped kind of like Estus flasks. That's really kind of awesome. I want to get my hands on a glass like that. And at number 3, it's worth noting that Dark Souls 2 had a weapon degradation bug that wasn't fixed for a really long time. Basically, how weapons degrade in the game is based on frames per second within the game itself, and so while the game averages around 25 to 30 frames per second, if you were playing on a high-end PC and playing at 60 frames per second, that meant that your weapon would degrade twice as fast and basically screw you over and make the game 10 times more difficult than it already is. The higher the frame rate, the more the weapons would degrade, and this was even the case in the current-gen console versions of Scholar of the First Sin Dark Souls 2 that ran at 60 frames per second. they made the game with that bug in there. I mean, I guess if you think about it, if you're a Dark Souls player who likes more challenge, there's more challenge in the weapon degradation. But it's also very interesting that From Software intended it and they want the game to play that way. In some ways, if you think about it, it's kind of a punishment if you're playing on better hardware. If your game can push out a max frame rate, it'll fuck you up in the game. It's a very interesting way of developing a game that I haven't seen before. And part of the reason why it's so complicated probably explains why they didn't fix it for over a year from the original launch of Dark Souls. It's crazy. It just goes to show that From Software does whatever they want despite what fans say. Just recently they made a statement saying that Dark Souls 3's poise stat that seems kind of useless in the game is actually working as intended despite players' complaints. So it seems like their whole ideology behind game development is deal with it. And at number 2, a lesser known fact about From Software's whole library is that they actually helped with the Tenchu series. Yes, that awesome stealth game series. They're known for publishing Wrath of Heaven, Fatal Shadows, Dark Secret, Shadow Assault, and Shadow Assassin. They didn't actually develop any of these themselves other than Shadow Assault. Of course, besides that, you guys probably know the other games they're known for, like Armored Core, Enchanted Arms, and Chrome Hounds. Yikes. Nobody's perfect. And at number 1, series creator Hidetaka Miyazaki is on record as making Dark Souls not to be a punishing jerk crushing players, but because he just truly and genuinely wanted an almost masochistically punishing game to experience for himself. He and his team put his faith in making a game that they actually wanted to play and sticking to their ideals, and it turns out it worked. That's pretty inspiring, and that type of ideology should be followed for anybody creating anything, especially games. You make the game you want to make. Dark Souls itself doesn't follow trends and put things in its game just to make it like other games. It does exactly what it wants, from the difficulty to the way it presents the lore, even to how it doesn't deal with some bugs like I mentioned in number 3. That's what makes Dark Souls 3 special and unique. And honestly, that's why we love it, so thanks Miyazaki-san. However, stop the presses, we have some bonus facts because there's never enough weird Dark Souls factoids. Did you know that Dark Souls had a variety of other names in the works that were rejected for legal reasons? Dark Souls was actually kind of like a last string choice. Before that, the last and most notable other choice for the game was actually Dark Ring, which in British slang means butthole. So you can obviously guess why they didn't go with that name. And in another fact, I thought this was pretty cool. There's an app out there that actually lets you leave messages similar to how you do in the Souls games. You leave them in certain locations where you were, and you can only use a limited number of phrases. It's called Soapstone, and it gives you a select choice of words to leave in a GPS tagged location. And it's actually kind of cool. And last, but definitely worth noting, the streamer Lobos Jr. has streamed Dark Souls playing it blindfolded, upside down, and now in black and white with a cool mod. The way he likes to play these games and make it even more difficult, I like to think he's just a show-off asshole, but he's also extremely talented, so our hats off to him. So guys, those are 10 Dark Souls facts you probably didn't know. There's a lot of videos like this out there, but we tried really hard to find some weird stuff. There's a lot of other interesting factoids about From Software and the Soulsborne series in general, so we want to hear from you guys some other tidbits you know. And what facts have you just learned about now from us? If you did learn anything, clicking the like button is a great idea because it helps us out so much, and we appreciate it. And if this is your first time here, subscribing is a good idea as well because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.